On a cold February morning in 1935, a silver aircraft rolled onto the tarmac at Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio. Its four engines gleamed in the winter sun. Inside the cockpit, test pilot Leslie Tower gripped the controls of what he believed would change American aviation forever. But in less than 3 minutes, that dream would burn in a twisted wreck of metal and broken ambition. The man who designed it, watching from the ground, would see his entire future collapse in flames. His name was Donald Douglas, and the Army had just rejected him. But this isn't his story. This is the story of the man the Army rejected first, the engineer they told would never build bombers, the designer whose revolutionary aircraft they called too radical, too risky, too expensive. His name was Glenn Luther Martin. And 15 years after that rejection, his creation would rain destruction on the Third Reich from 30,000 feet, flown by boys barely old enough to vote, carrying more firepower than entire squadrons from the previous war. The B-26 Marauder, the Widowmaker, America's deadliest bomber. This is how a rejected engineer built the weapon that helped win World War II. Glenn Martin didn't come from wealth or privilege. Born in 1886 in Macksburg, Iowa, he grew up watching birds and dreaming of flight in an era when such dreams marked you as a fool or a madman. His father died when Glenn was young, leaving his mother to raise him alone. They moved to California, settling in Santa Ana, where Glenn worked as a car salesman and mechanic. He was good with his hands, obsessive about understanding how things worked. In 1905, he read about the Wright brothers' success at Kitty Hawk. Something ignited inside him. He was 19 years old, and he knew with absolute certainty what he would do with his life. He would build flying machines. He started in his mother's church, renting space to construct his first aircraft. Neighbors thought he was insane. His mother believed in him. Using plans adapted from the Wright designs and his own innovations, Martin built a pusher biplane in 1909. On August 1st of that year, he flew it. Not far, not high, but he flew. He became one of the first aircraft manufacturers in America, building planes in that church, then in a larger factory. He barnstormed across the country, performing at air shows, taking paying passengers, refining his designs. By 1912, he had built a revolutionary seaplane. By 1914, his company was building military aircraft. The Army noticed him, gave him contracts. Small ones, but contracts nonetheless. Glenn Martin's future looked bright. Then came the Great War. American aviation was a disaster. Planes built for combat arrived at the front obsolete, underpowered, dangerous. Pilots died in aircraft that fell apart in flight. The Army needed bombers, real bombers, not converted reconnaissance planes. Martin saw the opportunity. In 1918, he proposed the MB-1, a twin-engine heavy bomber unlike anything America had produced. It was massive for its time, a biplane with a wingspan of 71 feet, powered by 2 Liberty engines producing 400 horsepower each. It could carry 1,040 pounds of bombs. The Army ordered it. The MB-2 followed, an improved version. Martin had arrived. He was America's premier bomber manufacturer. But Glenn Martin had a problem. He was a perfectionist. He insisted on the best materials, the finest craftsmanship, the most advanced designs. This made his aircraft expensive. Very expensive. After the war, military budgets collapsed. The Army wanted cheap planes, lots of them. Martin refused to compromise quality. Contracts dried up. Worse, the Army began developing its own aircraft in-house, cutting private manufacturers out. Martin watched his company struggle through the 1920s. He saw other designers, younger men, hungrier men, winning the contracts he thought should be his. Men like Donald Douglas, his former employee who had left to start his own company. Men like William Boeing. The rejection stung. It burned. But Martin refused to quit. He relocated to Baltimore in 1929, merging with another company to survive the Depression. He kept designing, kept building, kept innovating. He created the Martin B-10, the first all-metal monoplane bomber to enter American service. It was revolutionary, featuring a retractable landing gear, enclosed cockpits, and rotating gun turrets. It could fly faster than the fighters meant to intercept it. The Army bought 342 of them. Finally, Martin thought, vindication. But the glory was brief. The B-10 was quickly surpassed by newer designs. By 1939, as war erupted in Europe, Martin's company was again struggling for relevance. Boeing's B-17 Flying Fortress dominated heavy bomber production. Douglas had the Navy contracts sewn up. Martin needed something bold, something radical. He needed to prove he still mattered. In 1939, the Army Air Corps issued a specification for a new medium bomber. They wanted speed, lots of it, more than 350 miles per hour. They wanted range, payload, and defensive armament. They wanted it fast, ready for war. Martin's chief designer, Peyton Magruder, went to work. What he created was extraordinary and terrifying in equal measure. The Martin 179, soon designated the B-26 Marauder. It was unlike any bomber the Army had seen. Sleek, compact, powered by two massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 engines producing 2,000 horsepower each. It had a wingspan of only 65 feet, remarkably short for an aircraft of its size. Those wings were thin. Designed for speed, not lift, the Marauder could fly at 315 miles per hour, making it one of the fastest bombers in the world. It could carry 3,000 pounds of bombs. It bristled with machine guns, up to 12 50 caliber Brownings in later versions. It was a flying weapon, but those wings, those damn wings. I think they gave the Marauder a wing loading higher than any previous American bomber, over 53 pounds per square foot. This meant the aircraft had to fly fast to stay airborne, very fast. Landing speeds approached 130 miles per hour, unheard of for the time. Stall speed was nearly 120 miles per hour. Pilots accustomed to the forgiving handling of the B-17 or B-25 would find the Marauder brutal and unforgiving. Lose speed on approach, drop below that stall speed for even a moment, and the Marauder would kill you. The Army didn't care. They looked at the performance figures and ordered 1,100 aircraft off the drawing board in September 1940, before a single prototype had flown. It was the largest aircraft order in American history at that time. Glenn Martin had his vindication, but he had also created a killer. The first B-26 flew on November 25th. 1940. Test pilots reported it was fast, powerful, and dangerous. It demanded constant attention, perfect technique. There was no room for error. The Army began training crews at MacDill Field in Florida and other bases across the country. Young men, many with barely 200 hours of flight time, were handed the controls of this unforgiving machine. The accident started immediately. B-26s crashed on takeoff, crashed on landing, crashed when pilots tried to fly on one engine and couldn't maintain altitude. The wing loading was too high, the stall speed too fast, the margin for error too thin. By 1942, the Marauder had earned a reputation as a widowmaker. Pilots called it the flying prostitute because it had no visible means of support. They called it the Baltimore whore, a reference to Martin's factory location. And they said one a day in Tampa Bay, referring to the crash rate at MacDill. Martin's triumph was becoming a disaster. Crews refused to fly it. Training bases reported morale collapsing. The Army considered canceling the entire program. A Senate investigation was launched in 1942 to determine if the B-26 should be scrapped entirely. Martin's company faced ruin. Everything he had built, everything he had fought for, hung in the balance. The rejected engineer was about to be rejected again, finally and completely. But Martin refused to surrender. He knew the Marauder wasn't fundamentally flawed. It was demanding, yes, brutal even, but not broken. The problem was training. Pilots were being sent to B-26 squadrons without adequate preparation. They didn't understand the aircraft's characteristics, didn't respect its limitations. Martin sent his own engineers and test pilots to training bases to teach proper technique. The Army extended training programs, increased flight hours, implemented stricter standards. Gradually, the accident rate declined. Pilots learned. They learned to respect the Marauder, to fly it by the numbers, to never get slow, never get sloppy. Those who mastered it discovered something remarkable. The B-26 was a superior combat aircraft. In the spring of 1942, the first Marauder groups deployed to the Pacific and North Africa. On April 5, 1942, B-26s flew their first combat mission, attacking Japanese positions in New Guinea. In North Africa, they supported the invasion, hitting German and Italian positions with devastating accuracy. The Marauder's speed made it difficult to intercept. Its heavy defensive armament made it costly to attack. Crews who survived the training period found the aircraft could take tremendous damage and bring them home. The Marauder had a narrow bomb bay, limiting its payload compared to heavy bombers, but what it carried it delivered with precision. It was built for medium-altitude tactical bombing, hitting bridges, rail yards, airfields, troop concentrations. At this mission, it excelled. By 1943, Marauder groups were operating across the Mediterranean and preparing for the invasion of Europe. The 9th Air Force, tasked with tactical support for the D-Day landings, relied heavily on B-26 groups. Pilots and crews had learned to love the aircraft they once feared. Lieutenant James Farrington, a B-26 pilot with the 344th Bomb Group, wrote home in March 1944, describing the Marauder as the finest bomber in the world, fast enough to outrun fighters, tough enough to absorb flak, stable enough to put bombs exactly where they needed to go. He flew 47 missions over France. He survived because the Marauder brought him home every time, often shot full of holes, engines failing, but flying. The accident rate, once horrifying, had become the lowest of any American bomber. The B-26 would ultimately achieve the lowest loss rate per mission of any American bomber in Europe, less than 0.5%. For every 1,000 missions flown, fewer than 5 aircraft were lost. The Widowmaker had become the crew saver. On the morning of June 6, 1944, wave after wave of B-26 Marauders roared over the English Channel toward Normandy. They hit German coastal defenses, artillery positions, communication centers. All day they flew, mission after mission, preparing the way for the men storming the beaches below. In the weeks that followed, Marauders became the scalpel of the Allied advance, cutting rail lines, destroying bridges, isolating German units. When German forces tried to counterattack, Marauders caught their columns on the roads and destroyed them. Flying at 10,000 feet, below the heavy flak ceiling but high enough for accuracy, Marauder crews delivered their bombs and turned for home. They flew in tight formations, boxes of 6 to 18 aircraft, their combined firepower deterring German fighters. Those fighters learned to avoid the Marauders unless they vastly outnumbered them. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Stillman commanded the 397th Bomb Group, flying from airfields in France after the breakout. His crews flew 2 or 3 missions a day, sometimes more. They were exhausted, sustained by coffee, cigarettes, and the knowledge that every bomb they dropped shortened the war. Stillman flew in the left seat, leading formations into the teeth of German defenses. On August 13, 1944, his Marauder took a direct hit from flak over a rail yard near Chartres. The right engine exploded. The wing caught fire. Stillman held the aircraft steady long enough for his crew to bail out, then rode it down, too low for his own parachute. He was 29 years old. His co-pilot, radio man, and 2 gunners survived and evaded capture. The bombardier died when his parachute failed to open. Stillman's navigator, 2nd Lieutenant Michael Kowalski, made it back to Allied lines 3 weeks later. He requested immediate reassignment to another Marauder crew. When asked why, he said simply that the B-26 had saved his life once and he trusted it to do so again. He flew 31 more missions before the war ended. By late 1944, the Marauder was the backbone of tactical air operations in Europe. The 9th Air Force alone operated 11 Marauder groups, nearly 600 aircraft. They struck marshalling yards, airfields, bridges, ammunition dumps, anything that kept the German army functioning. Accuracy was extraordinary. The Marauders' stable flight characteristics at bombing altitude allowed bombardiers to place ordnance within meters of their aiming points. On November 8, 1944, B-26s of the 386th Bomb Group were tasked with destroying the Mettgethen Bridge near Königsberg, a vital rail link supplying German forces in East Prussia. 3 missions had already failed, the bridge protected by concentrated flak. The 386th sent 18 aircraft in at 11,000 feet. They lost 2 Marauders to flak but put 36 bombs directly onto the target. The bridge collapsed into the river. Soviet forces advancing from the east sent a message of thanks through Allied liaison officers. Glenn Martin never flew in combat. He was 58 years old when the war ended, gray-haired, wealthy beyond his early dreams, and vindicated at last. The B-26 had proven itself the most successful medium bomber in the European theater. Of 5,157 Marauders built, they flew 129,943 missions and dropped 169,382 tons of bombs. They achieved a 98.8% mission completion rate, the highest of any American bomber. Crews who survive training almost always survive the war. The Marauder that nearly destroyed Martin's reputation had instead secured his legacy. He had built exactly what the Army needed, even though they hadn't known they needed it, even though they had nearly rejected him. But the cost was real. 911 Marauders were lost in combat. Training accidents claimed hundreds more. Young men died learning to fly the aircraft that would save their lives in combat. The cruel mathematics of war. Those who mastered the Marauder swore by it. Those who died learning to fly it never got the chance. And Glenn Martin carried that weight. In interviews after the war, he spoke with pride about the Marauder's combat record, But he never forgot the accidents, the crashes, the early days when his creation was killing the men it was meant to protect. He had built a weapon that demanded excellence, that punished mediocrity with death, that gave no second chances. It was a bomber for total war, unforgiving because war itself is unforgiving. After the war ended, production of the B-26 stopped immediately. The last one rolled off the assembly line in April 1945. Unlike the B-17 or B-24, the Marauder did not see post-war service. It was too specialized, too demanding, built for one purpose and one time. The Army Air Force retired them all within 2 years. Many were scrapped, cut up for aluminum. A few survive in museums, preserved as monuments to the men who flew them and the engineer who built them. Glenn Martin continued designing aircraft until his death in 1955. His company built successful airliners, military transports, experimental aircraft, but nothing ever matched the B-26, the bomber born of rejection. It was the aircraft that nearly killed its own reputation before proving itself in the crucible of war. In the end, the Marauder's story is not really about the aircraft itself. It's about the men who flew it, crews like those of Lieutenant Jack Havener, who completed 68 missions with the 322nd Bomb Group, or Captain Robert Page, who flew 73 missions and brought his crew home every single time. It's about the courage required to climb into an aircraft known as the Widowmaker and trust your training, trust your crew, trust the machine that so many others had died learning to fly. It's about young men from Iowa and Texas and New York, boys who had never flown anything before the war, who learned to handle one of the most demanding aircraft ever built and used it to break the back of the Wehrmacht. And it's about a rejected engineer who refused to quit, who built the bomber the Army didn't know it needed, who watched his creation nearly fail before it succeeded beyond all expectation, the B-26 Marauder. Built by a man the Army had rejected, flown by boys who became men in its cockpit. America's deadliest bomber. Not because it killed easily, but because those who learned to fly it could not be killed easily at all.